Hi, welcome to the BYU-Idaho Tutoring Center videos. The topic of today's video is species, or what is the definition of a species and how we classify species. So the definition for species that we're going to be using primarily in this course is that a species is a group of populations whose members have the potential to interbreed and form viable, fertile offspring. So it centers around the ability of these different organisms able to form offspring. And you notice that it says a group of populations because all humans are considered the same species. And so we're all a bunch of different populations living in different areas. And so even though we probably won't mate with people in other populations that are faraway places, we still have the potential, if we did mate with them, we could still produce viable, fertile offspring for the most part. So because of this definition, it brings up some questions of what is reproductive isolation and the barriers that prevent different species from effectively producing viable, fertile offspring. So that's just reproductive isolation, any barrier that is going to prevent the formation of hybrids. So hybrids are just a mix of two species. We talk about barriers that cause reproductive isolation, and there's two main types of barriers. They're pre-zygotic and post-zygotic. So pre-zygotic barriers have to do with anything that prevents the fertilization, the actual fertilization of an egg and a sperm. And post-zygotic barriers are barriers that even that though fertilization was able to happen, the hybrid that is formed is not viable or fertile. So again, pre-zygotic barriers, they impede mating or hinder fertilization. So these are the three types that impede mating, and these are the two that hinder fertilization. So habitat isolation occurs when two species are living in different habitats, and so they never will actually have the opportunity to mate and form viable, fertile offspring. Temporal isolation occurs when two organisms or populations live in the same environment, however they are separated by the time of day that they are around or the seasons in which they're out, and so they will never have the opportunity to even fertilize or come together. Behavior isolation occurs when you have two species or organisms that have different mating rituals. This has to do with mate recognition, and so they won't ever mate because they have different behaviors in how they mate. And so these are all the ones that prevent mating. These ones are ones in which mating is attempted, but it is unsuccessful. So in mechanical, two species or organisms can attempt to mate. Because of different morphological differences, they're not able to mate. Their structure of their body prevents them from effectively mating. And then gametic is the individuals are actually able to mate, and the sperm tries to fertilize the egg but is unsuccessful for a variety of different biological reasons that they can be. So those are pre-zygotic. Make sure you know these 5 different types of pre-zygotic, and because there most likely will be test questions where they give you a situation and say what is the reproductive barrier that is preventing them from forming an offspring. And so you need to know those. Post-zygotic, as I said, in post-zygotic barriers, the zygote was actually able to be formed, but the zygote that is formed is not viable or fertile. So the first one is reduced hybrid viability. So the zygote forms, but the zygote most likely won't survive, or if the zygote does survive, it will be extremely weak and most likely die off. So the viability of it is reduced, or the ability for it to survive and live. Reproduced hybrid fertility is that the hybrid that is formed has good viability, it can survive and live, but it is not fertile, it is a sterile organism. And so a really common example of this is when a horse and a donkey mate, they form a mule, and mules are used for lots of purposes, for farming and other things like that. However, the mule is infertile and cannot mate and form offspring. So that means that we are not following this species concept because we're not forming a fertile offspring. The last one is hybrid breakdown. And so in hybrid breakdown, they actually form a hybrid that is viable and fertile. However, the offspring that this hybrid forms aren't viable and fertile. So eventually it's not going to lead to continued production of offspring. So that's why it's also a post-zygotic barrier and prevents the hybridization of two species. So those are the reproductive isolation barriers. However, this species concept that we're talking about actually has some limitations. And so this species concept that we've been talking about is actually called the biological species concept. And some of its limitations is that it cannot address asexual organisms. Asexual organisms form offspring just by themselves. And so they aren't mating with anything, but they're still forming offspring. So how do we account for those organisms in this species concept? Well, we really can't. And so there's actually quite a few other species concepts that have their limitations and also their advantages in which they can be used. So you'll need to know all these species concepts. So the morphological species concept classifies organisms based on their body shape and features. And this is the one we most commonly do when we're just kind of looking at species from the outside. We're like, oh, that's a dog because they both have these 4 legs and all these other features. So it's got its advantages because it can account for asexual, where the biological could not. However, it also has its limitations because the factor that's determining the difference between a species is kind of hard to be set in stone. It can cause scientists to argue about what is actually similar characteristics and what is not. So that's the morphological. The ecological species concept classifies species in terms of their niche. So I am not sure if you have done the ecology unit yet, but in ecology you learn that a niche is this species interaction with the non-living and living things in its environment. So kind of what it does in its environment. And so it classifies species as being in the same niche. So 2 different species could look a lot the same, but they completely use different resources and eat different things. So then they are considered different species in this ecological species concept. So this one's beneficial too because we can account for asexual organisms. It does have its limitations as well though. The phylogenetic species concept classifies organisms as the smallest group of organisms that share the most recent common ancestor. And so they will do this using phylogenetic trees, which we're going to talk about and I'm going to be talking about in other videos. But it uses molecular and morphological data to classify these. And so this is beneficial because now we can look at, make species of fossils or organisms that are past. We can't do that with any of these because we can't see this as much. And we can also do it with asexual. However, it can be difficult because it relies on trying to figure out how these trees interconnect and how closely related organisms actually are. So for the purpose of this class, we're going to mostly be focusing on the biological species concept. That's the main one that we're going to be using as the definition of a species. However, recognize that there is a lot of different concepts out there, and you'll need to know them all. I hope this video was helpful. This is all for today. I hope you have a better understanding of species and the different barriers that prevent species from mating and producing viable fertile offspring, and also have an understanding of all the other species concepts. Thank you for watching.